So, give you a bit of quiz this morning. If I asked you what Jesus' first miracle was, I think some of you Bible bowlers would probably say it is turning the water into wine. Okay, you would be technically correct. But I heard this recently, and I just thought this was great, and it just hit home for where I am. But someone was joking and said Jesus' real first miracle was having friends in his 30s. And that just hit me really hard. I thought, man, whew, that's right. And I don't know if that's because, you've got kids now and your schedule is just totally different. And your friends, they've moved off or they've got, their own schedule they're trying to wrestle with. And it just seems like friendship is one of those things that is difficult to nail down as you get older. And honestly, we don't talk about friendship just a ton in church. And we talk about it to kids, right? We harp on, as kids grow up, hey, you need to pick the right friends. You need to choose good friends so they carry you in the right direction. But once we get past that, we kind of leave friendship alone and just kind of lie. And Anna Gaines and I have talked about this. It's a difficulty. It's something we struggle with and try to figure out. But just because we're adults doesn't mean friendship isn't important. It is still tremendously important. We see this narrative at the very beginning of the Bible, right? That Adam has all these things surrounding him, and yet he doesn't have somebody who is like him. So God gives him a double blessing. He gives him a wife and a friend in Eve, somebody who can understand him, can relate to him, knows just how he thinks. And he gets this tremendous blessing. But it's also a blessing in our day-to-day life, something we realize when we have good friendship and when we lack it, that there's something important there. So this has been a couple of years now, but the Surgeon General of the United States, he even issued a warning on the impact of loneliness. And this is a direct quote from the kind of beginning of this report. But he starts out by saying, in recent years, about 1 in 2 adults in America reported experiencing loneliness. And that was before the COVID-19 pandemic cut off so many of us from friends, loved ones, and support systems, exacerbating loneliness and isolation. Loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individual and societal health. And this is really crazy what he says next. It is associated with greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than that associated with obesity and physical inactivity. And it goes on. It's just page after page of talking about just how important being connected with other people truly is. And I'm sure it's a great report. I didn't read all of it. I've heard about it in the past. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure if we read it, there'd be some helpful things in there. But as people of faith, right, we believe there's a higher authority, right, that there's a great physician, and that he has even better wisdom for us to have than just the Surgeon General. So today, I want to give you an idea that I really want you to hang on to. I want to give you some things that may change your heart and your thinking and maybe your passion and direction and where you're going. And at the end, I really want us to get some change in action, some application. So this is the biggest, or the idea I want us to latch on to this morning. And this is the idea. The most important earthly relationship you can have is a friendship. And I'm going to explain that a little bit because I know some of you immediately are like, no, that's not it, right? So I just want to walk you through some of the opportunities or the alternatives that you may be thinking, okay? So the first one, you may say, no, the most important is a spouse. And I ask you, how did you get your spouse? Most likely you spent time on dates. You spent time doing recreational activities together. You spent long hours just talking, sometimes about nothing. You went on trips together. You were much more likely to be friends before you were lovers and spouse. And I believe friendship is one of those things that keeps a marriage vibrant. When two people really can say, hey, they're my best friend, the marriage seems to work and thrive. And what do we often see, the complaint or the trouble that we find in marriages, right? It is, hey, when we dated, my wife, she used to go to the games with me, and she used to be watching the games with me. But now that we're married, that doesn't happen, right? So what's the solution? He goes with his friends and does that activity. And what's the complaint from the wife that we often hear is, when we were dating, he used to talk to me all the time. And now he comes home and he doesn't say anything, right? We used to talk all the time. But now what does she do? She goes, spends time with her girlfriends just to talk, right? And I think a question that underlies that is, where is my friend? Where did my friend go? The person who did these things with me or had these conversations with me. So maybe you didn't think of a spouse. Maybe you thought, hey, parenting, grandparenting, those relationships, hey, that's the most important, right? Well, let me ask you, other than hoping that your son, your daughter, your grandson, granddaughter grows up to be a responsible and God-fearing man or woman, what do you have in mind as the goal of that parenting and grandparenting? My guess is that one of the big goals, at least that I can think of, is that I hope when my kids are older that we can be friends, right? That they call me and want to ask my advice about things, or they call me just to tell me about their day and what's going on with them or what they're struggling with, or that they still want to come for family vacations or for holidays. For me, that's a big end goal that I hope to achieve. So we see that sometimes we have titles, especially family titles, but oftentimes they don't play out like they're supposed to. And this is really clear if we get into Mark chapter 3. So I encourage you to turn to Mark chapter 3, or you can follow along in the Luke Bulletin. But we're going to skip around just a little bit, but you guys will probably be familiar with this story. We're going to start in verse 13 of Mark chapter 3. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted. And they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. We're going to skip down a little bit. You just see all the disciples that he called, the 12. And then when you get down to verse 20, it says this. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. And then there's this debate about whether or not Jesus is casting out demons by the power of a demon and that sort of thing. But if we skip down to verse 31, this is what it says. And this is kind of the key verses that I want you to focus on. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. At the end of this passage, I think Jesus echoes that proverb that was read earlier this morning, Proverbs 18:24. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. I think Jesus is directly attacking relational ties, familial ties, and these people who are around him got him better than his own family because they understood God's will and purpose, and they saw Jesus understanding God's will and purpose, so they were actually closer than his actual mother, brother, and sisters who said, hey, this guy's out of his mind. We gotta rein him in. And I think indirectly, we could also say that Jesus is talking about friendship, that those who you are close to and those who you share purpose with, you will have a strong relationship with. So, proximity and purpose. I want you to look at this first part. If you back up to verse 14, this is what it says. It says, he appointed 12 that they might be with him. So part of him appointing 12 is so he could spend a lot of time with those 12. And it is just hard for you to be close and have a friendship with someone if you're not around them. I sympathize with this, but this is something I hear often in the youth group is, I just don't have friends in the youth group. I just don't feel that connected. And I think sometimes as we come to church, we can say, I just don't feel that connected to the people at church. I feel more connected with people I work with, or people in my family, or friends I've known for a really long time. And I just challenge you to think about this for a little bit. You get maybe an hour a week with the people at church, and that's being generous. Even if you come to more than one service, an hour is generous because most of the time you're singing songs, you're in prayer, you're hearing someone like me preach or do something. You're not spending just a ton of time talking and relating to people. So an hour is really generous. Compare that to the amount of time you spend with people at work or with people outside of work. And a lot of it is just we don't spend enough time with the people around us at church. And that's why there's sometimes a disconnect. But let me give you some hopeful news. There's a company called Barna, and they do all types of research about faith, about church, and this is something they found through one of their studies. There's a link to this in the bottom of the Loop Bulletin if you want to look into it more, but it says this: consistent church attendance is a factor in relational flourishing, with 60% of church adults who attend weekly having high scores in this category. Other measures of commitment, such as leading in some capacity at a church, staying in a church for a long tenure, and experiencing a lot of spiritual growth in the past year, also hang together with high scores in relational commitment and satisfaction. A rooted church life and a flourishing relational life often go together. And I don't think that this is incidental. I think this is the way that God has designed it, to give us a community where we have a shared purpose and bringing us together so that we can get to know and encourage one another more and ultimately follow Jesus better. It's not surprising that they found that this continued attendance and this continued involvement within church, people in their relationships, they flourish. So proximity is one part, but it's not the only part. The other part is purpose. If you look down in verse 14 again, it says this: he appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. Jesus didn't just want to be around the 12 because they were funny or because they were great conversationalists or, they always just want to listen to what he had to say. He had a purpose for them. In 1 John 3:8, John describes Jesus' purpose this way: the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's works. And reason is just another word for purpose. Jesus' purpose was to destroy the works of the devil. What do we see him doing with his disciples? He's sending them out to be a part of that purpose, to preach the gospel which delivers people from sin and the works of the devil. So he's including them in the purpose. And unfortunately, sometimes I think we come to church not out of purpose. We come for other reasons, for obligation sometimes. Well, it's the right thing to do. I'm supposed to be here. Or we come because we think, well, I'm bound to make friends. I'm bound to make connections just because I'm around people, right? But it doesn't always work that way. The illustration I think about is there is one point in history where our government obligated people to serve in the military. And many of you have shared with me that experience, and it was not a good experience. Many people, they took off and run, had to make hard decisions because they saw their friends going to war, being injured, dying, right? And they didn't want that purpose. I don't want to sign up for that. I don't want to be a part of that. And in church, when we don't view, hey, God calls me to take up my cross and calls me to sacrifice, and we just are here for friends, that turns us off. I don't want to sign up for that. I was just here for friends, right? And we go find a different purpose. There's probably no more concise explanation for our purpose in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 through 25. It says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So we're here to spur one another to love and good deeds, to encourage one another to take up our cross and follow Jesus. And each day that passes, we're closer and closer to that day that the Hebrew writer is talking about. So there's not one day that goes by where we don't need encouragement, because we're that much closer. So we've got to spend our time purposefully. Now, I don't mean you can't have fun. I don't mean that you can't joke around. There's a healthy balance in between there, right? We've got to have those relational times, but also there's times where we got to be serious, where we got to confess what's going on in our lives, where we got to ask hard questions, we got to answer hard questions, where we got to search ourselves to see whether or not we're actually doing what God has called us to do. There's a good balance. So now I want us to spend just the rest of the time that we have together talking about how we can actually do that. Because I know that some of you get that. You understand, hey, I've been here. I feel like I've got the purpose, and I'm still struggling in this area of being close to people, having quality friendships. So here are the 3 points I just want to lay out there. The first is quality over quantity. You know, I think about it this way. Sometimes when we say something like, I just don't have friends, it's kind of like when we open the fridge and say, there's nothing to eat, right? Or we open the pantry and say, there's nothing good in here to eat. Really, it's that we don't like what we see, right? And there are options available, but we just don't like what we see. And sometimes God has already blessed us with the relationships that we have and that we need, but we've just neglected those relationships for whatever reason. And sometimes we just need to double down and really reinvest in those relationships. And I think this is particularly important for married couples. You know, to really ask yourself, hey, is my spouse currently my best friend? Or am I choosing to spend more time somewhere else, investing in somewhere else? And am I feeling lonely as a result of that choice? This is something I encourage you to do. If you're planning to get married soon, put on your calendar your first anniversary. Sit down and really talk about how things have changed in the first year of your marriage. How much time are you actually spending together after that first year has passed? And I encourage you, 1 year after your kid is born, on their birthday, maybe the day after, right? Sit down, have a conversation. How has having that kid changed how much time you spend together? Do you feel distant from one another? What do you need to do? And that doesn't matter if it's the first, second, third kid, however many. I encourage you to do that. There's a famous book, His Needs, Her Needs. And in that book, it's about marriage. He recommends 15 hours a week of undivided attention with one another. And I know that is a lofty goal, 15 hours. But I bet you will be blessed by every hour that you can add to that number. Number 2, create or renew a life group. Some of you already have proximity. You're close to people because of your stage of life or whatever reason. but you haven't come together for a purpose. Maybe there's some of you who are really interested in a particular ministry or serving in a particular way, but you just haven't found the people to come alongside you. I encourage you, maybe that is something God is putting on your heart. And a couple weeks ago, I was walking past the small chapel on Wednesday, and there was a group of families who are usually in there eating together, and it just hit me. It's like, man, that is a life group waiting to happen. And they may be a life group. It just hit me like, hey, where people are already meeting may already be opportunities for purpose to take place. And then the last thing I want to mention, and then we'll have an invitation, is that sometimes we have to put ourselves under the microscope. Because sometimes we are doing things that are preventing relationships from happening. We're making choices that make it hard for us to actually be a friend or to have friends. And that's all of us, right? Sometimes we go to our homes or we come to church and instantly we pull out our phone and we're just scrolling on our phone. And that makes it very hard to have a conversation with you or for you to have a conversation with someone else. And it sends the message that you're more interested in the people behind the screen than the people in the room. And sometimes that's just a habit we have to eliminate. David says in Psalms 23, 13 and 14, he says, hey, God, search me and see if there's any offensive way in me. And we all have offensive ways in us, right? There's things that prevent us from getting close to people because of the way we choose to act. Also, I would submit to you to think about other relationships that have gone sideways. Now, in all relationships, we have a part of our responsibility in that. They have a part, we have a part. But is there a pattern of how it seems to go down? Does it always end the same way, the same way, the same way? Sometimes we have to humbly step back and say, what's my part in that? Why does it keep happening that way? There is one exception of a relationship, though, where we're totally at fault. And that is our relationship with God. I mean, He has done nothing to harm our relationship. It is always us. And you could go and you could fix all your relationships, get great friendships, but if your friendship ultimately doesn't line up with God, if He's not someone you have a good relationship with, all those others will just eventually fade away, go by the wayside. And amazingly, even though we've messed up so many times, God has desired to be our friend. He has laid down His Son's life. His Son has given up His life for us so that we could experience a closeness with God. And as we close today, I just want to encourage you to think about that relationship as well. Is how close are you with God this morning? Is there something you need to straighten out? As we spend time in communion in a little while, is there something you need to put under the microscope and ask God about? I invite you to do that as we stand and we sing.